very, very quick introduction before I move on to the real substance of things. Because of the work of the people in this room, and some people not in this room, we have achieved something which is very unexpected for Cumbria, which is to say that the central government, at a time of budget cuts, has committed up to £10 million potentially even more with European match funding, to install broadband in Cumbria. And when I say this is very unexpected, when I spoke to Jeremy Hunt, who's the Secretary of State, working on this 4 or 5 months ago, he told me informally and privately that he thought it was very unlikely that Cumbria was going to be able to get the money, because the expectation was that there would be a grant to Scotland and there would be a grant to North Yorkshire, and it wouldn't make any sense to also make a grant to Cumbria. So the work of people in this room really broke those odds, and it broke those odds because essentially what's happened is that the only way of delivering fast broadband access to rural communities is if the communities themselves are really engaged, really want it, commit to having it, put their work in. The cost structure is very, very difficult. And it was that that impressed the Secretary of State, that impressed BDUK, is the community enthusiasm in this room. And even with that cash, even with the money that we've managed to raise, we're going to have to need a lot of community participation if we're going to make that money go far enough to actually end up with super fast broadband in everybody's house. To give you a sense of that, the Broadband Stakeholders Group, which is a sort of quasi-non-governmental organisation, came up with a report, I think about 18 months ago, suggesting that installing super fast broadband across Britain would cost something in the region of £14 billion. This is not money that existed even under the last government. This is crazy money, £14 billion. We have to drive that price down, and we also want to have the very best super fast broadband network in Europe. And the pilot for that is going to be here. We're going to prove, we hope in Cumbria, that we can actually get super fast broadband into the most sparsely populated part of the most sparsely populated district and the most sparsely populated constituency in England. People talk about the last third, we're something like the last 2%, right, in terms of the difficulty of access. Even our geomorphology, even limestone, makes getting stuff difficult. But the basic thing that makes it expensive, as everybody in this room will understand, is that super fast broadband in the end relies on fibre optic cables, and in the end digging fibre optic cables into the ground is expensive, and the further away a house is and the further away the community is, the more people pay. So obviously if you are British Telecom or Virgin Media or another operator, it is much more convenient to deliver your services to the centre of a big city, where you have a very, very large number of people in a very small area, and where you can be sure that you make back the investment of laying that cable. So the point of this day, and the point of what I hope are going to be a number of other engagements in the future, is to get us into that position. And the reason why we need to be in that position is that our economy, particularly the economy of Penrith and the border, is going to critically depend on broadband in the future. We have more self-employed people than any other constituency in Britain. More than 20% of people in this constituency work from home. We really need to make sure that people can continue to make a living in remote rural areas and can overcome the barrier of distance. The thing about the broadband is it overcomes the barrier of distance. It means that if you're running a business, you have a much greater market reach, your speed to market is much quicker, your transaction costs are much lower. All of us, of course, doesn't matter whether you're a farmer having to fill in forms online, or whether you're a bed and breakfast trying to run a website to get tourists into the area, or whether you are a fishing shop in Penrith, which is currently doing £1 million of business out of the shop door and £7 million of business on the internet. All of us, as we move forward, are going to have this stuff just to compete and survive. But it's also going to be vital for health. Talking to Parkinson's UK, everybody who has Parkinson's currently in this constituency is having to travel to Newcastle just to meet a neurologist. That isn't for scans or investigations, it's just a conversation. You do not want to drive to Newcastle if you have Parkinson's. You could do that down a live video link from your home if we can get this infrastructure in. All of your children, or in some cases grandchildren or relatives, are increasingly being asked to do schoolwork online and cannot because they can't access it. And I can go on endlessly about the applications, and one of the things that we're lucky to have today is Simon Jones from Cisco, who's going to wave at you, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the benefits. If we can create what we're calling a hyper-connected community here in rural areas, many of the other things that bring benefit to this area. In order, though, to introduce the thing and to get on with what is going to be a rushed and busy day, we're going to have Miles talking about what was done in Great Asby, and we're going to have Barry talking a little bit about infrastructure backhaul and what the internet really is. Barry, is it you first, then Miles, or the other way around?
You tell us.
Right, brilliant. Okay. I think what we're going to do is we're going to start with Barry, and I'm going to bring him up on stage where we can see it. I'm going to be very unfair to Barry, and I'm going to interview him in a ruthless fashion. Because I think Barry knows more, really, about what's in the ground and how these networks were built than almost anyone else in the country. He's been working with the University of Lancaster. The fact that some of you are online at the moment here is a combination of the work of Miles and the work of Barry in laying something called the Clio network. So I'm going to use Barry, and I apologise to those of you in the room who are great experts on broadband, but I'm going to try to use Barry to see if, with my very simple questions, we can extract a basic explanation of what this business is. So, Barry, if you were trying to explain to your grandmother what broadband is, how would you explain, or explain to someone in the room who maybe wasn't very familiar with the computer, could you roughly explain what it is? And I'm going to follow up with more questions.
Hi everyone. But he sprung this on me completely unaware. I did not know he was going to do this, so I'm not prepared, so I apologise in advance. Okay, what's broadband? Can you hear? Nearer? Is that better?
That's better.
Shake your head if you can't hear me. What's broadband? It's an interesting one because I think there's a lot of argument about what broadband is. But I'll tell you what my opinion of broadband is, and people who disagree with me can try and shoot me down. I think broadband is something that is very, very much faster than the things you've got today. What you've got is first generation broadband at the moment. You've got what you see advertised in the papers, you know, the up to 20 megabits, up to 24 megabits, which none of you actually get. You wish you did, but generally speaking, it's nothing like that. That's first generation. And it's all right for doing basic things, if you can get it, that is. Things like reading your email, a little bit of Amazon shopping, a bit of eBay, things like that, it's fine. But we're talking about next generation access broadband, and that's a technology that takes you a step on from where you are now. It will enable things. Analogies would be like television. I mean, we've moved, quite a few people in this room will remember 4 or 5 lines and black and white TV and the joys of all these sorts of things. When you imagine 3D high definition compared to the old 4 or 5 line black and white, next generation broadband is going to be that sort of quantum jump from what you're used to. And just as you'll be able to see all sorts of things in a completely different way, you can do things in a different way. Broadband is interactive, it's very high speed, it will support high definition, it will support video. The sorts of things Rory was talking about, things like telemedicine, where you want good high quality links that are not sort of stuttering or broken up or anything, but feeling that you're in the same room as somebody. It's all those sorts of experiences, and that to me is broadband. It's not slow speed, it's not 2 megabits, it's very, very fast.
Right, thank you. And I'm going to give you a microphone, which I hope is going to work. So you conduct this.
I can just speak loudly. I'm perfectly capable of speaking loudly.
No, everyone gets across so that happens, can't they? So, but Barry, the real. Let's go back to the very, very basic. How does this work? What is this thing of fibre optic cable? Why do we need a fibre optic cable? Why are we trying to lay fibre optic cables? Very briefly.
Okay. At the moment, everything is done over telephone lines, so it's the standard telephone line with some digital data on it. The trouble is, telephone lines were designed, the whole system was designed a century, well, at least a century ago, probably a lot longer. And it was designed to carry voice, and voice doesn't need a lot of bandwidth. It's a very narrow bandwidth technology. You cannot run even today's broadband very effectively over it, which is why so many of you don't get 512 or 2 meg or whatever. The reason is that copper can only support, I mean what basically happens is the further out you go, the slower the speed. And there's no solution to that. You'll hear about all sorts of things that say, you know, copper goes faster and faster. It doesn't. At the end of the day, there's laws of physics that say you can only get so far with a high-speed link. And sort of things we're talking about these days, even with ADSL, the current stuff you're getting, you're only talking about you know, a kilometre or 2 kilometres at good speed. And when you're talking about next generation, you can almost throw a tennis ball, 100 metres, 150, 200 metres, and it slows down dramatically.
Harry, just quickly, just for people in the audience who don't know, what does 2 megabits mean? What are these words? What are these speeds?
Heck. I'll put it in the context of a voice circuit. If you were using making a telephone call today, it's equivalent to about 32 voice channels is 2 megabits. So in BT terminology, when you make a call, you're using about 64k, so multiply 64k into 2 million. 2 million. And it's roughly 32 voice channels is what you can carry in 2 megabits. So 32 times faster than a voice call.
All right. And now, this is just a chance to, before we get Miles talking about specifically what was done in Great Astley, just for anybody who has questions about broadband, there's a very, very broad range of knowledge in the room, but can I please be asked, does anybody have a question about the basic physics or the basic infrastructure or what this stuff is? Electrical signals, data signals, exchanges, cabinets. Are you even interested in any of that stuff? But because if you are, this is the chance to answer it. If you're not, you could just fall back into a world which says there's this magic stuff that goes into your house and allows you to do stuff. But if anybody got any questions about the actual hardware, the kind of electrical engineering? Yeah, Dave.
Are there any limits on the fibre optic cables?
Okay, very good question. Let me just explain Dave's question before I pass to Barry. I'm sorry, I'm trying to act as a translator, but Barry's so much cleverer than me that if I don't act as a translator, I'm sometimes worried it's going to go over everyone's head. But in essence, there is a very, very severe limit on the current cabling. There's a limit on what you can do with a copper cable. There's definitely a limit. In certain cases, some of you have aluminium cables. There's a real limit to what you can do in an aluminium cable. A fibre optic cable, as the name suggests, is connected with light. And the question is there a limit to how much data you can put down a fibre optic cable? Over to Barry.
Yes and no. I'm practicing for a career in politics. No, technically there is basically no limit. I mean, the sorts of speeds you're talking about, you could carry every phone call in the world simultaneously down one pair of fibre cables. The no side of it is that. The yes side of it is it gets more expensive as you go faster. So if you're talking about the sorts of fibre optic cables that we would use in the Eden Valley, they're very cheap out to about 10 kilometres, and out to about 10 kilometres you've got no speed limitations at all really, you go 10 gigabits or whatever. If you go further, you can go out to 80 kilometres or 120 kilometres, but things just get a little bit more expensive. If any of you live more than 120 kilometres out from Penrith, then you might want to think about connecting to Leeds or somewhere else. So as far as we're talking about in this neck of the woods, no, there are no limits either for distance or speed. But you know, you can go hundreds, thousands of kilometres, but it gets more expensive. So the low-cost stuff that we would want to deploy is typically about 10 kilometres. But there's not an actual limit; it's just the price that starts going up as you go further.
Sorry, and this again. Am I right in saying